I want you to exaggerate your English pronunciation. Let's do a little bit of speaking practice. The story is called Time Traveler. Repeat after me. A bright flash lit up the sky. A bright flash lit up the sky. And a weird sound echoed all around. Echoed all around. All right, say this with me 2 times, okay? A bright flash lit up the sky, and a weird sound echoed all around. A bright flash lit up the sky, and a weird sound echoed all around. In the middle of a busy street, a guy stood there. A guy stood there, looking totally lost. He appeared to be completely lost. He was looking totally lost. That looking means he appeared to be. All right, say it with me. In the middle of a busy street, a guy stood there looking totally lost. In the middle of a busy street, a guy stood there looking totally lost. His clothes were ancient. His clothes were ancient, super old. His clothes were ancient, super old. People rushed by, barely noticing him at first. Barely noticing him. But then they started turning their heads. Something felt off. Okay, so to feel off, that's a phrasal verb, and it means to sense that something is not quite right. Something is not normal. It feels off. But you're not exactly sure why it feels off. You're not sure what is making it feel off. It just feels off. All right, let's say that all together. Ready? People rushed by, barely noticing him at first, but then they started turning their heads. Something felt off. Again, people rushed by, barely noticing him at first, but then they started turning their heads. Something felt off. This dude was a time traveler. This person, this man, this guy, this dude was a time traveler. Lost in a totally unexpected era. Lost in a totally unexpected era. Era is the time that it's happening, right? He's in the wrong time, in the wrong era. All right, let's say that twice. This dude was a time traveler, lost in a totally unexpected era. This dude was a time traveler, lost in a totally unexpected era. Cars zoomed past him. Zoom. Cars zoomed past him. And towering buildings surrounded him like giants. Towering. Very tall, like towers. And towering buildings surrounded him like giants. Cars zoomed past him, and towering buildings surrounded him like giants. Again, cars zoomed past him, and towering buildings surrounded him like giants. There were all these strange machines beeping. Beep, boop, beep, beep, boop, boop. There were all these strange machines beeping. And his heart raced with confusion. His heart is beating very quickly. He's confused. His heart raced with confusion. Here we go. There were all these strange machines beeping, and his heart raced with confusion. There were all these strange machines beeping, and his heart raced with confusion. Where the heck was he? Where the heck was he? What kind of place was this? What kind of place was this? Where the heck was he? What kind of place was this? Where the heck was he? What kind of place was this? Taking a deep breath, he spotted a big sign above a shop. Taking a deep breath, he spotted a big sign above a shop. Taking a deep breath, he spotted a big sign above a shop. The letters looked bizarre. Bizarre. The letters looked bizarre. And he couldn't make sense of any of it. And he couldn't make sense of any of it. Make sense of. If you make sense of something, you understand something. He couldn't understand any of it. All right, all that. The letters looked bizarre, and he couldn't make sense of any of it. The letters looked bizarre, and he couldn't make sense of any of it. Nearby, a group of people burst into laughter. Burst into laughter. Laughter. Nearby, a group of people burst into laughter. Again. Nearby, a group of people burst into laughter. He watched their lips move, catching snippets of their voices. Catching, so he's hearing little bits, snippets are little pieces, little bits, snippets of their voices. He watched their lips move, catching snippets of their voices. He watched their lips move, catching snippets of their voices. The words sounded strange, but somehow familiar. He had to figure this out. He just had to. He had to figure this out. Fast. He needed to do it fast. He had to figure this out fast. All right, here we go. The words sounded strange, but somehow familiar. He had to figure this out fast. The words sounded strange, but somehow familiar. He had to figure this out fast. Setting off down the street. Set off, that means to start, to travel towards a destination. Setting off down the street. He scanned the signs. He's looking back and forth, scanning the signs. He's looking at the signs. And listened intently to the chatter around him. And listened intently, very carefully, to the chatter. The chatter is the people talking around him, the little noise, the chatter around him. All right, let's say that together. Ready? Setting off down the street, he scanned the signs and listened intently to the chatter around him. Setting off down the street, he scanned the signs and listened intently to the chatter around him. A guy on the corner was holding a newspaper. A guy on the corner was holding a newspaper. And without thinking, the traveler reached out and snagged it. The traveler reached out and snagged it. A guy on the corner was holding a newspaper, and without thinking, the traveler reached out and snagged it. A guy on the corner was holding a newspaper, and without thinking, the traveler reached out and snagged it. The man shot him a curious glance. So if you shoot someone a glance, you shoot a glance. That means you quickly look at someone. And it was a curious glance, so he's curious, like, huh? The man shot him a curious glance. But he didn't care. He ran his fingers over the words. So he's looking at the words, determined to make sense of it all. He just wants to understand what is happening. He's determined to make sense of it all. The man shot him a curious glance, but he didn't care. He ran his fingers over the words, determined to make sense of it all. Again. The man shot him a curious glance, but he didn't care. He ran his fingers over the words, determined to make sense of it all. He spotted a restaurant, packed with people, eating and chatting. So he saw a restaurant filled with people. The people were eating and speaking, chatting together. He spotted a restaurant packed with people eating and chatting. He spotted a restaurant packed with people eating and chatting. He stepped inside, pointing at the menu, feeling a little lost, but ready to dive in. He stepped inside, pointing at the menu, feeling a little lost, but ready to dive in. He stepped inside, pointing at the menu, feeling a little lost, but ready to dive in. The worker at the counter smiled and said something he couldn't understand. But he studied the guy's face, trying to pick up clues, trying to get a clue, to discover a clue, trying to pick up clues. All right, let's say that. Here we go. The worker at the counter smiled and said something he couldn't understand, but he studied the guy's face, trying to pick up clues. Try again. The worker at the counter smiled and said something he couldn't understand, but he studied the guy's face, trying to pick up clues, nodding as he made eye contact. He grabbed a word. He grabbed a word. What does that mean? That means he understood a word. He was able to understand a word. He grabbed a word. Progress. He is now making progress. He's starting to understand. Nodding as he made eye contact. He grabbed a word. Progress. Nodding as he made eye contact. He grabbed a word. Progress. He was making progress. Nearby, a family laughed together. And he listened intently as a child spoke to her mom. Nearby, a family laughed together, and he listened intently as a child spoke to her mom. Again, nearby, a family laughed together, and he listened intently as a child spoke to her mom. Word by word, he started piecing together this language puzzle. Word by word, he started piecing together this language puzzle. Word by word, he started piecing together this language puzzle. He found a park full of kids playing, and a woman absorbed in a book. If you're absorbed in a book, you're really into it. You're very interested in the book. You're like reading like, oh, I am so absorbed. This story is so absorbing. All right, and a woman absorbed in a book. He found a park full of kids playing and a woman absorbed in a book. He found a park full of kids playing and a woman absorbed in a book. Taking a seat on a bench, he soaked it all in. He soaked it. That means he took it all in. I missed a red right there, didn't I? That should be red. I make mistakes. Taking a seat on a bench, he soaked it all in. He's experiencing it all. He's soaking it in. Watching the signs, books, and newspapers. And mimicking the conversations around him. Oh, that's good to do. Mimic the conversations around you. Copy. Pretend to do it yourself. You mimic it. Imitation. Parrot. All right, and mimicking the conversations around him. Oops. Go back. Here we go. Taking a seat on a bench, he soaked it all in, watching the signs, books, and newspapers, and mimicking the conversations around him. All right, try again. Taking a seat on a bench, he soaked it all in, watching the signs, books, and newspapers, and mimicking the conversations around him. Suddenly, he heard a man tell his dog, "Sit." His eyes lit up a new word. His eyes lit up. He whispered it to himself, "Sit." Sit. He understood the word. Yes, he was picking things up. Suddenly, he heard a man tell his dog, "Sit." His eyes lit up. A new word. He whispered it to himself, "Sit." Yes, he was picking things up. All right, try it again. Suddenly, he heard a man tell his dog, "Sit." His eyes lit up. A new word. He whispered to himself, "Sit." Yes, he was picking things up. As the sun set, painting the sky with rich colors. So the sun is painting the sky with lots of beautiful colors, rich colors. The traveler stood on a bridge, looking out over the city. Looking out over this city that didn't feel so alien anymore. Oh, the city is starting to feel more, he's becoming accustomed to the city. It doesn't feel alien anymore. It doesn't feel strange anymore. All right, let's do that together. As the sun set, painting the sky with rich colors, the traveler stood on a bridge, looking out over this city that didn't feel so alien anymore. Again, as the sun set, painting the sky with rich colors, the traveler stood on a bridge, looking out over this city that didn't feel so alien anymore. Just a day ago, everything had thrown him for a loop. Throw him for a loop. What is throw him for a loop? How do I explain that? Everything had confused him. It was like around him. He didn't know what was happening. It tricked him. It confused him. It threw him for a loop. Now he was starting to make sense of it all. Now he was starting to understand, make sense of it all. Just a day ago, everything had thrown him for a loop. Now he was starting to make sense of it all. Just a day ago, everything had thrown him for a loop. Now he was starting to make sense of it all. Sure, he still had a lot to learn. But he felt hope. Sure, he still had a lot to learn, but he felt hope. Sure, he still had a lot to learn, but he felt hope. He was getting by, figuring things out, little by little. He was getting by, figuring things out little by little. He was getting by, figuring things out little by little. Language was the key, and he was just beginning to unlock it. Language was the key, and he was just beginning to unlock it. Language was the key, and he was just beginning to unlock it. Tomorrow, he'd learn even more. Tomorrow, he'd be ready to talk. Tomorrow, he'd be ready to talk. Tomorrow, he'd learn even more. Tomorrow, he'd be ready to talk. Tomorrow, I'm sorry, I messed up. He'd learn even more. Tomorrow, he'd be ready to talk. Oh, I messed up on the very last one because that's the end of the story there. Now we're going to go nonstop. Let's see if I can do it perfect. I'll try my best. Say it with me. Shadow me. Here we go. A bright flash lit up the sky, and a weird sound echoed all around. In the middle of a busy street, a guy stood there, looking totally lost. His clothes were ancient, super old. People rushed by, barely noticing him at first. But then they started turning their heads. Something felt off. This dude was a time traveler, lost in a totally unexpected era. Cars zoomed past him, and towering buildings surrounded him like giants. There were all these strange machines beeping, and his heart raced with confusion. Where the heck was he? What kind of place was this? Taking a deep breath, he spotted a big sign above a shop. The letters looked bizarre, and he couldn't make sense of any of it. Nearby, a group of people burst into laughter. He watched their lips move, catching snippets of their voices. The words sounded strange, but somehow familiar. He had to figure this out fast. Setting off down the street, he scanned the signs and listened intently to the chatter around him. A guy on the corner was holding a newspaper, and without thinking, the traveler reached out and snagged it. The man shot him a curious glance, but he didn't care. He ran his fingers over the words, determined to make sense of it all. He spotted a restaurant, packed with people eating and chatting. He stepped inside, pointing at the menu, feeling a little lost but ready to dive in. The worker at the counter smiled and said something he couldn't understand, but he studied the guy's face, trying to pick up clues. Nodding as he made eye contact, he grabbed a word: progress. Nearby, a family laughed together, and he listened intently as a child spoke to her mom. Word by word, he started piecing together this language puzzle. He found a park full of kids playing and a woman absorbed in a book. Taking a seat on a bench, he soaked it all in, watching the signs, books, and newspapers, and mimicking the conversations around him. Suddenly, he heard a man tell his dog, "Sit." His eyes lit up. A new word. He whispered it to himself. Sit. Yes, he was picking things up. As the sun set, painting the sky with rich colors, the traveler stood on a bridge, looking out over this city that didn't feel so alien anymore. Just a day ago, everything had thrown him for a loop. Now he was starting to make sense of it all. Sure, he still had a lot to learn, but he felt hope. He was getting by, figuring things out little by little. Language was the key, and he was just beginning to unlock it. Tomorrow, he'd learn even more. Tomorrow, he'd be ready to talk. Yes, good workout. Boom. Keep moving forward one step at a time, and I'll see you in the next practice session.